Sometimes, life doesn't break you with noise. It breaks you quietly, one bill at a time, one late notice, one unanswered call. And sometimes, it gives you a test so cruel, you wonder if the world ever meant to be fair at all. This is the story of Daniel Rivers, a single father doing everything right, yet still finding himself on the edge of losing everything he loves. He didn't have much: a small apartment, a modest job, and a son who was his whole world. But what he did have was heart. The kind of heart that refuses to quit, even when the world tells you to. When his landlord, a man named Grayson, laughed at his hardship and dragged him into court, Daniel wasn't supposed to win. He wasn't supposed to stand a chance. But this isn't just a story about rent or money. It's a story about dignity, about the quiet strength of a father's love, and how, sometimes, the smallest voice in the room can change everything. They say justice is blind. But sometimes, justice just needs someone brave enough to stand before it, with nothing but truth on their side. And in this courtroom, where power sneered at struggle, something extraordinary happened. A moment of truth so sharp, it silenced arrogance itself. And what the judge said next, no one in that room would ever forget. Music fades lower, creating a quiet, suspenseful tone. So sit back, take a deep breath, and let the story unfold. Because what you're about to hear isn't just about one man's fight for his home. It's about every person who's ever been told they're not enough, and found a way to rise anyway. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the thin curtains of a modest apartment. The walls were pale and worn, with faint cracks that told stories of time and quiet endurance. The small kitchen smelled faintly of coffee and toast, not fresh or fancy, but comforting in its simplicity. Daniel woke before the alarm. He always did. The habit of responsibility never let him sleep too long. He sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing his eyes, staring at the framed photograph on the nightstand. His late wife, smiling under a summer sky. Her laughter seemed to linger even now, a ghost of warmth in a cold room. From the other room, small footsteps approached. "Morning, Dad," said a sleepy voice. Daniel turned and smiled. "Hey, buddy. You sleep okay?" Ethan nodded, his messy hair sticking up like a small crown. He was 8 years old, with a soft smile and the same kind eyes his mother had. Daniel tousled his hair, hiding the heaviness behind his smile. The morning routine began quietly: toast, cereal, coffee that had seen better days. Daniel helped Ethan with his backpack, checking it twice like always. They shared small laughter over a crooked drawing Ethan had made, a family portrait with 3 figures, one drawn as an angel hovering above. Daniel's chest tightened, but he smiled through it. Outside, the city was already alive. Buses hummed, cars hissed past puddles, and the air carried a chill of early autumn. Daniel held Ethan's hand as they walked to the corner. "Dad, are you coming to my game this Friday?" "I'll try, kiddo. You know how work is." Ethan's face fell slightly, but he nodded. "It's okay. Maybe next time." Daniel looked away. The guilt was familiar, quiet, constant. He worked 2 jobs, mornings at a hardware store, evenings as a delivery driver. It was enough to keep the lights on, sometimes. Barely. At the school gate, Daniel crouched and tied Ethan's shoe. "You go out there and make your mom proud, okay?" Ethan grinned. "I will." And then he ran, his laughter fading into the chorus of children. Daniel stood there for a moment, just watching, before heading toward the bus stop, shoulders heavy, but heart steady. The apartment complex was old, red bricks dulled by time, stair rails that creaked with every step. It wasn't much, but it was home. Daniel arrived that evening, exhausted but calm. The hall smelled faintly of paint and old carpet cleaner. He balanced his grocery bag as he turned the corner, and nearly bumped into Mr. Grayson. Grayson was in his mid-50s, sharply dressed, holding a clipboard like a badge of authority. His smirk arrived before his words did. "Daniel," he said smoothly, "we need to talk about your rent." Daniel tightened his grip on the grocery bag. "I know, Mr. Grayson. I'll have the full payment by Friday. I just need a few more days." Grayson chuckled, a sound like mock sympathy. "Always a few more days, isn't it? You're a hard-working man, sure. But hard work doesn't pay the bills, does it?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "I'm doing my best." "I'm sure you are," Grayson replied, his tone dripping with superiority. "But this isn't charity housing. You fall behind again, and I'll have no choice but to start the process." He tapped the clipboard as if it were a gavel. Then, with a faint laugh, he walked away. His cologne lingered longer than his words. Daniel stood there for a long time, staring at the peeling wallpaper, his hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from humiliation. That night, Daniel sat at the small kitchen table, surrounded by papers, bills, notices, receipts. The soft hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. Ethan was asleep on the couch, his small chest rising and falling under a thin blanket. One bill stood out, the hospital invoice. His son's illness 2 months ago had drained what little savings they had. The emergency visit, the tests, all necessary, all crushingly expensive. Daniel leaned back, rubbing his temples. He whispered to himself, "Just 1 more month. I can make it work." But deep down he knew, the math didn't add up. Every hour of overtime was a drop in a leaking bucket. He opened his wallet. 3 wrinkled bills. He exhaled slowly, a quiet surrender. The photograph of his wife caught his eye again, her smile frozen in time. "Lucy," he murmured, "I'm trying." Days passed in a blur of work and exhaustion. Rain leaked through the kitchen window. The faucet dripped constantly. Daniel had reported the issues weeks ago, but Grayson never sent maintenance. Instead, he sent reminders, bold, red-font letters taped to Daniel's door. Each one a scarlet threat. Each one signed with a smirk you could feel even in ink. One afternoon, Ethan came home holding one of those letters. "Dad, are we in trouble?" Daniel took it from him gently. "No, buddy. It's just paperwork. Nothing to worry about." But that night he lay awake, heart pounding, eyes open to the dark. The sound of rain outside was steady, almost soothing. But every drop seemed to echo the same thought: time is running out. Saturday morning. Daniel was home, folding laundry, when a sharp knock rattled the door. Grayson didn't wait for permission. He stepped inside as though he owned the air itself. "I gave you enough chances," he said bluntly. "You're a month behind now. I can't keep doing this." Daniel straightened up, his tone calm but firm. "I just need a little time. You'll get every penny." Grayson smirked, leaning on the doorway. "You single fathers always got a sob story. Maybe if you spent less time feeling sorry for yourself and more time working, you wouldn't be in this mess." Daniel's knuckles whitened around a towel. He said nothing. Grayson laughed softly. "You can glare all you want, Daniel, but business is business." Then, with deliberate cruelty, he added, "Maybe your boy will learn what happens when a man can't provide." Something inside Daniel snapped, but he stayed still, breathing slowly. He wouldn't give Grayson the satisfaction. "Please leave," he said quietly. Grayson scoffed, tapped his clipboard again, and walked out. His shoes clicked against the hallway like punctuation marks to an unkind sentence. The following Tuesday, Daniel came home to find an envelope wedged in his doorframe, stamped with the words, "Court Summons." He stood there for a long time, holding it in his hand, staring at the bold black letters. Ethan peeked from the doorway. "Dad, what's that?" Daniel forced a smile. "Just something grown-ups have to deal with." He closed the door, locked it, and sat down at the kitchen table. He tore open the envelope and read it once, twice, his chest tightening with each line. He was being sued for eviction. The court date was set for 2 weeks. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. Inside, silence. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in months, Daniel allowed himself to feel it all, the fear, the anger, the exhaustion. And yet, beneath it, something else stirred, a quiet resolve. He looked at the photograph of Lucy again and whispered, "I'm not giving up." Later that night, after Ethan fell asleep, Daniel sat alone by the window. The city lights flickered like stars that had forgotten how to shine. He sipped the last of his coffee, cold, bitter, and stared at the stack of papers. Each one seemed to whisper defeat, but he wouldn't let it win. He thought of Ethan's laugh, his drawings, his faith in him. That was reason enough. Whatever happened next, he would face it head-on. The clock ticked softly. Rain began to fall again, and as he closed his eyes, a single thought echoed in the quiet. Tomorrow, the fight begins. The morning after the summons, the world felt heavier. Daniel stood in line at the legal aid office, a dim, crowded place where hope waited in numbered tickets. He clutched his envelope, the court papers slightly wrinkled from his nervous hands. A woman at the counter called, "Next." Daniel stepped forward, offering a tired smile. I got this court notice," he began. "My landlord's evicting me, and I don't know what to do." The clerk glanced at the papers, her eyes scanning with practiced detachment. "Do you have an income, sir?" "Yes. 2 jobs. But it's not enough." She cut him off gently. "If you're above the threshold, we can't assign a public defender for civil cases. I'm sorry. You can try private representation or self-representation." "Self-representation," he repeated, unsure whether to laugh or cry. The woman offered a sympathetic shrug. "You can attend one of our free workshops. Tuesdays at 6. We'll teach you the basics." Daniel nodded slowly, clutching his papers as he walked out into the cold afternoon. He'd come looking for help, and left with a pamphlet. Outside, the wind tugged at his coat. He glanced at the paper in his hand. Tenant rights and responsibilities. He sighed. "Guess it's just me then," he murmured, not bitter, just resigned. That night, after putting Ethan to bed, Daniel sat at the small kitchen table, the same one covered in bills just days earlier. Now it was scattered with printouts, pamphlets, and handwritten notes. He'd borrowed an old laptop from a neighbor and was watching grainy YouTube videos titled, "How to Represent Yourself in Housing Court." The soft light from the screen flickered across his tired face. He paused every few seconds to take notes, words like unlawful eviction, tenant rights, repair negligence. Hours passed. The hum of the refrigerator mixed with the soft scratch of his pen. Ethan stirred in his sleep, calling softly, "Dad!" Daniel turned. "I'm right here, buddy. Go back to sleep." When he looked back at the screen, his reflection stared back at him, eyes weary but determined. For the first time in a long while, he felt a small spark of control. He wasn't just waiting for the world to crush him any more. He was learning how to stand up. At some point, Fatigue 1. Daniel's head rested on the table, surrounded by papers. In that half-dream state, he heard laughter, soft, familiar and warm. He opened his eyes, and in his dream, he was back in their old house. Lucy stood in the kitchen, sunlight streaming behind her as she packed Ethan's lunch for kindergarten. "Remember what you told me when the insurance company denied us?" she said, smiling. Daniel laughed softly. "I said a lot of things back then. You said, if you don't stand up for yourself, no one will." He remembered that day vividly, her courage in the face of illness, how she never gave up even when her strength faded. In the dream, Lucy walked over, touching his cheek gently. "You've always been stronger than you think, Danny." When he woke, the kitchen was still. The coffee mug was cold. But the words stayed with him. The next morning, Daniel stepped outside, stretching after another sleepless night. Across the hall, Mrs. Alvarez, his elderly neighbor, waved him over. "Daniel, Mijo, I saw that paper on your door. You okay?" He sighed. "Trying to be. Just figuring things out." She frowned. "That Grayson man. He's got no heart. You know he tried the same with the couple downstairs last year. Did they win?" She nodded. "They did." Judge threw it out when she saw the maintenance reports. Daniel's eyebrows lifted. "You still have any of those papers?" She smiled, shuffling inside her apartment. Moments later, she returned with a folder. "Copies. Keep them. You never know." He took them, gratitude flooding his voice. "Thank you, Mrs. Alvarez." She patted his arm. "You're a good man, Daniel. Don't let them make you forget that." As she closed her door, Daniel stood there a moment, feeling something he hadn't felt in weeks: hope. That afternoon, Daniel visited Ethan's school to explain the situation to Miss Hartley, his teacher. "I might need to miss a few pickups," he said quietly. "Court stuff." Miss Hartley's expression softened. "I'm sorry you're going through that. Don't worry about Ethan. I'll make sure he's cared for until you can get him." Daniel hesitated. "You don't have to." "I know," she said, smiling. "But sometimes people should help without being asked." Her kindness hit him harder than he expected. He nodded, swallowing emotion. "Thank you." It wasn't much, but it was something. A reminder that not everyone looked away when someone struggled. Meanwhile, across town, Mr. Grayson leaned back in a leather chair at a cafe, surrounded by two friends, fellow landlords, sipping lattes and laughing. "Court's next week," Grayson said, smirking. "It's a done deal. The guy's months behind. Can barely string a sentence together, I bet." One friend chuckled. "Single dad, right? They always cry about their kids. Makes the judges soft." Grayson snorted. "Judge Morales? She's by the book. She won't fall for that sympathy act." He stirred his coffee, satisfied. "Some people just aren't cut out for responsibility. You give them a place, they treat it like charity." The others nodded, unaware of the irony dripping from his words. Grayson smiled, already envisioning the victory, and the empty apartment he'd soon rent for double. Saturday arrived grey and wet. Daniel sat by the window, papers spread out again, notes, copies from Mrs. Alvarez, and his own growing pile of evidence. He'd written down every repair he'd requested and never received: the leaky faucet, the broken heater, the cracked window. He organized the timeline, every date carefully marked. Ethan sat nearby, coloring quietly. "Dad, what are you doing?" "Getting ready," Daniel said, smiling faintly. "For something important." Ethan's voice was curious. "Are we gonna lose the house?" Daniel paused, heart aching at the innocence in that question. He looked at his son and said softly, "Not if I can help it." Ethan smiled, as if that was enough. And maybe, Daniel thought, it was. That night, Daniel stood at the mirror, buttoning his shirt. His reflection looked older, lines carved by worry, eyes dimmed by exhaustion. He wondered if the judge would see him as capable, or just another desperate man in debt. He wondered if Grayson would laugh again, the same way he always did. He sat back down, flipping through his notes one last time. Tenant rights, proof of neglect, financial hardship exemptions. He wasn't a lawyer. He wasn't even sure if he was doing any of it right. But he knew one thing. He wasn't walking in there defenseless. He whispered to himself, maybe to Lucy, maybe to God, maybe to both. Just give me the strength to do this right. Outside, rain tapped softly against the window, steady, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. It was the sound of persistence. Ethan had fallen asleep early. The apartment was quiet, except for the rustle of papers. Daniel double-checked his folder. Documentation, photos, receipts, everything he could possibly bring. He placed the folder in his worn leather bag and sat down beside his son. For a long moment, he just watched Ethan sleep, his small hand curled near his cheek, peaceful and unaware of the storm waiting outside their door. Daniel brushed a hand through his son's hair and whispered, "You're why I fight. Always." Then, turning off the light, he let the darkness settle around him. It wasn't comforting, but it wasn't suffocating any more either. Tomorrow he would face the landlord, the court, and whatever came next. Not as a victim, but as a man standing for what's right. The alarm buzzed before sunrise. Daniel was already awake. He stood by the window, watching the first light bleed into the city skyline. The morning was grey, heavy clouds pressing low, the kind that promised rain. Ethan was still asleep, his small hand clutching a stuffed bear. Daniel dressed quietly, shirt ironed the night before, collar stiff, shoes polished though they were years old. He checked his bag again, documents, evidence, notes, all there. He poured a cup of coffee, but it went untouched. His stomach was too tight for food. Instead, he knelt beside Ethan's bed and whispered, "I'll be back before you know it, okay? Mrs. Alvarez will walk you to school." Ethan stirred, blinking sleepily. "You'll win, right?" Daniel hesitated, then smiled. "I'll do my best." Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of church bells. He took one last deep breath before stepping into the storm. The courthouse was colder than he expected. Sterile walls, echoing footsteps, and fluorescent lights that hummed like nervous energy. People shuffled papers, whispered, waited. Daniel found the courtroom listed on his summons. Room 204B. Housing Division. When he stepped inside, the room felt too big for him. Wooden benches lined the back. A raised desk for the judge. A long table for each side. And there, seated at the right table, was Mr. Grayson. Grayson wore a tailored suit, gold cufflinks, and that same smug smile Daniel knew too well. He leaned back in his chair, chatting with his attorney, a young man in an expensive tie who didn't look a day over 25. Daniel swallowed hard and took his place at the other table. No lawyer, just him. He arranged his papers neatly, though his hands trembled. Across the room, Grayson caught his eye and smirked, slow, deliberate, like a cat watching a cornered mouse. A side door opened. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Everyone stood as Judge Morales entered, a woman in her early 50s with silver-streaked hair and steady eyes that saw more than most realized. Her robe moved like calm authority itself as she sat. "You may be seated," she said. Her voice was soft but commanding. She glanced at the case file before her. Case number 2371, Grayson Properties versus Daniel Rivers. She looked up briefly. "Mr. Grayson, I see you're represented. Mr. Rivers, are you appearing pro se?" Daniel hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. I'm representing myself." Her eyes softened almost imperceptibly. "Very well. Let's proceed." Grayson's attorney stood first, buttoning his jacket with confidence. "Your Honor, this is a straightforward matter. My client seeks lawful eviction due to non-payment of rent for a period exceeding 30 days. The tenant, Mr. Rivers, has failed to make sufficient payments as required by his lease." He slid a stack of documents toward the judge. "Here are the notices, signed and dated." Grayson leaned back, arms folded, watching Daniel like a spectator at a play he'd already seen. When the lawyer sat, the judge turned to Daniel. "Mr. Rivers, you may respond." Daniel rose slowly, papers in hand. His voice was quiet at first, unsteady. "Your Honor, I did fall behind. My son was in the hospital 2 months ago. I've been working extra hours to catch up. I've already paid part of what I owe." Grayson chuckled softly, loud enough for everyone to hear. The sound cut through the air like a knife. Daniel's jaw tightened. He continued, "But my apartment's had several issues that haven't been fixed. The heater, the leak in the kitchen, broken locks. I've reported them, but—" Grayson interrupted. "That's nonsense, Your Honor. The place is fine. He's just trying to stall." The judge raised a hand. "Mr. Grayson, you'll have your turn." Her tone was calm, but her gaze lingered on him for a beat longer than comfort allowed. As Daniel presented his photos, water-stained walls, mold beneath the sink, Grayson's smirk returned. He whispered something to his lawyer, who laughed under his breath. Daniel heard it, but he didn't stop. His hands shook slightly as he spread the photos out for the judge. "These are from last week. I've sent multiple requests for repairs. None were done." Grayson's voice dripped with condescension. "Maybe if you spent less time playing photographer and more time paying rent, this wouldn't be happening." The courtroom murmured. The judge glanced up sharply. "Mr. Grayson, I suggest you refrain from commentary unless spoken to." Grayson shrugged, but the smirk stayed. Daniel sat down, feeling small, like every word he'd spoken had evaporated into the cold courtroom air. The judge reviewed the photos in silence. Then she leaned forward. "Mr. Rivers, you said you submitted maintenance requests. Do you have copies?" Daniel nodded, pulling out his carefully kept records. "Yes, Your Honor. Emails, text messages, and letters, all sent to Mr. Grayson's office." The judge scanned them, then turned her gaze toward the landlord. "Mr. Grayson, do you dispute these?" Grayson's confidence wavered, just slightly. I don't handle those requests personally. My assistant does." "Does your office keep repair logs?" she asked, her tone steady but firm. Grayson's attorney cleared his throat. "We might not have immediate access to those, Your Honor." The judge's expression didn't change, but the room felt colder suddenly. "I see," she said softly, flipping another page. "Mr. Rivers, please tell me about these rent increases you noted." Daniel handed over another paper, a printed notice of a rent hike from 3 months ago. "It went up by $250 a month." He said it was for building improvements, but nothing's been done. The judge compared the documents, her brow tightening. "Mr. Grayson," she said evenly, "were these increases approved by the city's housing board?" Grayson's face paled. "They were pending approval." The judge's pen paused. "Pending," she repeated quietly. "Yet they were charged to tenants." The atmosphere shifted. Gone was the smug laughter, replaced by an uneasy stillness. Daniel sat quietly, watching as Grayson began to lose the ease in his posture. His lawyer fumbled with papers, mumbling excuses about clerical errors. The judge wasn't buying it. Her tone sharpened. "Mr. Grayson, I see multiple rent increases issued within a 12-month period, all unapproved. That violates Section 43B of tenant law." She turned a page. "And these maintenance requests, they appear to be legitimate and unaddressed. In one, Mr. Rivers reports a broken lock that remained unrepaired for 3 weeks. Is that correct?" Grayson shifted in his seat. "We were short-staffed." Her gaze didn't waver. "Yet you found time to issue 3 notices of late payment." A few people in the gallery exchanged looks. Even the bailiff raised an eyebrow. Daniel's heart pounded. For the first time, he felt the tide turning. Slow, deliberate, unstoppable. Judge Morales leaned back, folding her hands. "Mr. Rivers, have other tenants in this building experienced similar issues?" Daniel nodded. "Yes, ma'am. My neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, gave me copies of her old maintenance complaints. She had to go to court too. Same pattern." The judge accepted the folder and flipped through the pages. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Interesting." She looked up at Grayson again, her tone now carrying the weight of command. "Mr. Grayson, are you aware that repeated unaddressed maintenance complaints, coupled with unauthorized rent increases, can constitute landlord harassment under state housing law?" Grayson's face flushed red. I wasn't aware of that interpretation." Her expression hardened. "Then perhaps you should become aware." The courtroom was silent except for the sound of her pen scratching across paper. Grayson's lawyer leaned in, whispering frantically. Daniel just sat there, his hands clasped, barely breathing. The tension in the room was electric. Judge Morales closed the case file slowly, setting her pen down with deliberate care. She looked from one man to the other, the wealthy landlord in his crisp suit, and the exhausted single father who had walked in alone but stood his ground. "Mr. Grayson," she began, voice calm but edged with steel, "you came here seeking judgment against your tenant. You claimed non-payment and breach of contract." She leaned forward slightly. "Yet what I see here is a pattern of neglect, of unlawful rent adjustments, and of disregard for tenant welfare." Grayson shifted in his seat, his mouth opening to object, but she raised a hand. "I'm not finished." The room froze. Her next words hung in the air like thunder about to break. "Before I deliver my decision, I have one final question." She turned her gaze directly on Grayson, her eyes unflinching. "Did you, or did you not, alter these documents to conceal unapproved rent hikes?" Grayson blinked, stammering, searching for words that wouldn't come. The silence was heavy, sharp, endless. Daniel's heart pounded so loud he could hear it echo. And then the judge leaned back, her eyes narrowing. "Very well," she said quietly. "Then I'll make my ruling." The gavel was still untouched, but the audience knew. The storm was about to break. For a long moment, the courtroom was utterly still. No one moved. No one breathed. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. A paper rustled somewhere near the back. Then silence again. All eyes were fixed on Judge Morales, whose pen now rested motionless beside the open case file. Daniel sat frozen, his palms slick with sweat. Across from him, Mr. Grayson looked pale, his once perfect posture beginning to sag under invisible weight. His lawyer whispered something hurriedly, but the judge's voice cut through the air before he could respond. "Mr. Grayson," she began, her tone calm yet carrying the weight of truth, "you came before this court seeking eviction based on your tenant's alleged failure to pay rent. However, what has been revealed here today paints a very different picture." She lifted the stack of documents, Daniel's notes, the maintenance records, the emails. "These are not the papers of a negligent tenant," she continued. "They are the records of a man trying, against all odds, to hold together a home for his child, while his landlord systematically ignored his responsibilities." A soft murmur rippled through the courtroom. Grayson's face tightened, but he said nothing. Judge Morales continued, her words deliberate and clear. "The evidence shows repeated rent increases without proper authorization, neglect of required maintenance, and attempts to misrepresent compliance to this court." She looked directly at Grayson. "This is not only unethical, it is illegal." She flipped a page, revealing highlighted lines and signatures. These documents, presented by the plaintiff, contain discrepancies between the reported and actual rental rates. Upon comparison with city housing records, she paused, looking at Grayson, it is clear these numbers were falsified. A quiet gasp spread across the room. Grayson's lawyer tried to object, but the judge raised a firm hand. "Sit down, counselor." Then, turning to Daniel, she said softly, "Mr. Rivers, the court appreciates your thoroughness in documenting these issues. Your diligence brought to light information that might otherwise have remained hidden." Daniel blinked, hardly believing the words. He'd come here expecting humiliation. Instead, he was hearing respect, acknowledgement. Judge Morales continued, addressing the room. "This court finds that the eviction attempt was not only baseless but retaliatory. Therefore, the motion for eviction is denied." The words landed like thunder. Grayson's head dropped. His lawyer stared down at the table. But the judge wasn't done. "Furthermore," she said, her tone sharper now, "Grayson Properties is hereby ordered to pay restitution to Mr. Rivers in the amount of 3 months' rent, along with civil penalties for unlawful rent increases and failure to maintain habitable living conditions." She turned the page again. "This case will also be referred to the City Housing Authority for further investigation into record tampering and potential fraud." A stunned silence followed. Grayson's mouth opened, but no sound came. His earlier arrogance had vanished, replaced by disbelief and fear. "Mr. Grayson," Judge Morales said, voice steady and final, "you have abused your position and your tenant's trust. The law exists to protect the vulnerable, not to empower the greedy." Then, with a sharp crack of her gavel, she declared, "Judgment for the defendant. Case dismissed." The sound echoed through the courtroom, crisp, final, liberating. For a moment, Daniel couldn't move. It didn't feel real. Then, slowly, he exhaled, the breath of months of fear and sleepless nights leaving his chest at once. A quiet applause began at the back of the courtroom. It wasn't loud, but it was real. A handful of people who had watched him stand alone and win. Even the bailiff cracked a small smile. Grayson stood abruptly, his chair screeching. "This isn't over," he muttered, but the fight had drained from his voice. He straightened his jacket and walked out, the sound of his expensive shoes echoing down the corridor like an admission of defeat. Daniel watched him go, not with anger, but with quiet relief. Justice had spoken, and for once it had been fair. The afternoon sun had broken through the clouds by the time Daniel stepped outside. The air felt cleaner somehow, fresher. He stopped on the courthouse steps, lifting his face toward the light. For the first time in months, he smiled, truly smiled. In his bag were the court documents, signed and sealed. But more importantly, he carried something else: peace. "Dad!" He turned at the sound. Ethan came running, his backpack bouncing, Mrs. Alvarez following behind at a slower pace. Daniel knelt down just as his son threw his arms around his neck. "You won," Ethan said breathlessly. "Mrs. Alvarez told me. You really won." Daniel laughed, the sound trembling with emotion. "We did, kiddo. We really did." Ethan hugged him tighter. "I knew you would." As they stood there, Daniel's mind drifted, back to another time, another voice. He remembered the hospital room, the beeping machines, the faint scent of antiseptic. Lucy's hand in his. Her voice, weak but still full of conviction. "Promise me," she had whispered, "that no matter what happens, you'll fight for what's right. Even when it's hard. Even when you're scared." He'd promised then, but he hadn't realized how much it would mean now. He could almost hear her now, as if carried on the wind. "You did the right thing, Danny." The memory brought tears to his eyes, not of pain, but of peace. They walked home slowly, hand in hand. Ethan chattered about his day, his drawings, the snack Mrs. Alvarez packed him. Daniel listened, every word like a melody. For once, he didn't worry about tomorrow. The rent was covered. The court had spoken. The wait was gone. As they passed their building, a city worker was stapling a notice to the door. "Property under review. Housing Department investigation." Daniel smiled faintly. Justice didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered, but it still echoed. Mrs. Alvarez waved from her window as they passed. "See, me, Joe? Told you the good guys win sometimes." Daniel chuckled. "Guess you did." That night, their apartment felt different, lighter somehow. The leaky faucet still dripped, but it didn't matter. Ethan was drawing again, humming softly, while Daniel sat at the kitchen table, the court order resting in front of him. He reached for the photograph of Lucy, the same one that had watched over every struggle, every sleepless night. The light from the lamp reflected in the glass like a second sunrise. He whispered, "We're okay now, Luce. We made it." In the corner of his eye, Ethan looked up. "Who are you talking to, Dad?" Daniel smiled. "Someone who's always believed in us." Ethan nodded solemnly, then went back to coloring. The clock ticked softly. The rain outside had stopped, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Daniel let himself truly rest. Hours later, after Ethan had fallen asleep, Daniel stood by the window, staring out at the city lights. The reflection of the courtroom still played in his mind, the judge's calm eyes, the sound of the gavel, Grayson's silence. He realized it wasn't just about winning. It was about standing up, about proving that decency, even quiet decency, still mattered in a world that often forgot. He thought of everyone who had helped along the way: Mrs. Alvarez, Miss Hartley, the clerk at the legal aid office. Small kindnesses that had built the foundation of his strength. He whispered into the stillness, "Thank you." And then, softly, as if answering back, the city seemed to breathe with him, a reminder that even the smallest voices could carry far when they spoke the truth. It had been 3 months since the court ruling. Winter had passed quietly, and spring was just beginning to touch the city. Soft breezes, blooming trees, and a warmth that seemed to seep into everything. Daniel stood outside a small, 2-bedroom duplex on the edge of town. The paint was fresh, the porch creaked softly under his shoes, and the windows shone with new glass. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. Ethan ran ahead, laughing as he darted through the empty living room. "Dad, there's so much space," he shouted, his voice echoing against the bare walls. Daniel smiled, setting down a box labeled kitchen. "Yeah, buddy. Guess we'll have to fill it with memories." Ethan peeked out of one of the windows. "Do you think Mom would like it here?" Daniel's voice softened. "Yeah, I think she would." The light filtered through the curtains just right. Golden, soft, almost heavenly. For the first time in a long time, Daniel felt something close to peace. 2 weeks later, Daniel started work at a local construction supply company, a full-time position this time, with benefits and decent pay. On his first day, his new boss, Mr. Coleman, clapped him on the shoulder. "Your references from the hardware store spoke highly of you," he said. "We need more people like that around here. Honest ones." Daniel smiled. "I'll do my best, sir." He meant it. There was a quiet pride in showing up each morning, not out of desperation this time, but purpose. He was good at his work, reliable, precise, steady, and people noticed. By the end of the month, he'd been given extra responsibilities, including overseeing deliveries and mentoring younger hires. For the first time, he wasn't just surviving. He was rebuilding. One evening, Daniel sat at the kitchen table, reading a newspaper while Ethan worked on homework. A headline caught his eye. "Local landlord faces housing fraud investigation." He read the first few lines slowly, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. "Grayson Properties," the article began, "is under investigation for multiple violations of tenant law, following complaints of falsified records and unlawful rent hikes. Several properties have been temporarily seized pending review." Ethan looked up. "What's wrong, Dad?" Daniel folded the paper and smiled faintly. "Nothing's wrong, son. Just, sometimes, people get what they earn, good or bad." Ethan nodded thoughtfully, then went back to his math problems. Daniel leaned back, staring out the window at the fading sunlight. He didn't feel vengeful, only relieved. Grayson's downfall wasn't his victory. It was just justice finding its way, slow but sure. Word of Daniel's case spread quietly through the community. At the grocery store, someone stopped him, a woman with tired eyes and a kind smile. "You're Daniel Rivers, right? The one who stood up to Grayson." Daniel nodded shyly. She smiled. "Thank you. You gave a lot of us hope." He didn't know what to say, just smiled and nodded. Soon, other tenants began sharing their own stories, filing complaints, demanding repairs. What started as one man's fight turned into something bigger, a ripple that kept expanding, touching lives he would never even meet. Mrs. Alvarez became somewhat of a local hero too, organizing a small tenants' meeting at the community center. Daniel attended once, quietly sitting in the back as people talked about fairness, courage, and accountability. He didn't speak much. He didn't have to. Sometimes, just showing up was enough. Life settled into a gentle rhythm. Mornings meant pancakes and laughter. Evenings meant helping Ethan with his school projects, volcanoes that smoked too much, science experiments that stained the table. On weekends, they went to the park. Daniel would sit on the bench, sipping coffee, watching Ethan run through the grass, chasing dreams as simple as sunlight and wind. One afternoon, Ms. Hartley, Ethan's teacher, joined them. "He's doing really well in school," she said, smiling. "He's got that same determination as his dad." Daniel chuckled. "Let's hope he gets the better half of me." She smiled. "I think he already has." There was warmth in her eyes, the kind that came from admiration, not pity. Daniel had never realized how far he'd come until he saw it reflected in someone else's gaze. That night, after Ethan had gone to bed, Daniel sat on the porch, the cool air brushing against his face. He looked up at the sky. A blanket of stars stretched endlessly above. He thought of Lucy again. Her laugh, her courage, the way she always saw the light in every shadow. He could almost hear her voice, soft, reassuring. "You kept your promise, Danny." He closed his eyes, whispering into the quiet night. "I tried." The wind stirred gently, carrying the faint scent of spring flowers, lilac and rain. And somehow, in that stillness, he felt her presence, not as pain, but peace. A month later, the local housing authority hosted a small event, a tenant empowerment workshop. Daniel was invited to speak. He almost declined. Public speaking wasn't his thing. But Ethan begged him to go. "Dad, you always tell me to be brave," he'd said. "You should too." So he went. Standing in front of a small crowd, Daniel adjusted the microphone. His voice was quiet, humble. "I'm not a lawyer," he began, "and I'm not anyone special. I'm just a dad who didn't want to lose his home. But I learned something. You don't have to be powerful to do what's right. You just have to stand." The audience was silent, listening not to a speech, but to truth. He continued, "Justice doesn't always come fast. Sometimes it feels like it'll never come. But if you keep going, if you stay honest, it finds its way." When he finished, the applause was soft but heartfelt. It wasn't the sound of fame. It was the sound of respect. As the weeks passed, life kept moving. Daniel didn't seek attention, but his story lingered, retold in small ways, shared by word of mouth, referenced in community newsletters. People remembered not the courtroom or the headlines, but the way he carried himself, quiet, humble, unwavering. One reporter later wrote, "In a city of noise and power, one man reminded us that justice isn't about volume, it's about integrity." Daniel clipped the article and tucked it into a drawer, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. One evening, Daniel and Ethan sat outside under the fading orange sky. Ethan leaned against his father's shoulder. "Dad, are we going to stay here forever?" Daniel smiled. "Maybe not forever, but long enough to make it home." Ethan grinned. "Then I'm gonna plant a tree in the yard." "A tree?" "Yeah. So even when we move, something of us stays here." Daniel chuckled softly. "That's a beautiful idea, kiddo." They sat in silence, the last rays of daylight painting the world gold. Sometimes peace didn't come with a shout. It arrived quietly, like a leaf drifting down on a spring breeze. Weeks later, Daniel stood before the mirror one morning, the same reflection he'd once seen filled with exhaustion and fear. Now he saw something different. Strength, calm, gratitude. He straightened his tie, ready for another day of work, and caught sight of Ethan running around in the next room, laughing, alive, free. That was the victory. Not the court ruling. Not the money. Just this. The ordinary piece of a life rebuilt on honesty and courage. As he locked the door behind them, the narrator's voice, steady and warm, fades in. Sometimes, justice doesn't thunder. It whispers. It moves through hearts, through courage, through the quiet choices of ordinary people. Sometimes, the smallest voices remind the world of its conscience. And as the camera pans upward, from the father and son walking down a sunlit street to the open sky, the final note lands, gentle and sure. Because when one person stands for what's right, the echo never really fades. And just like that, the storm was over. The courtroom emptied. The papers were signed. But for Daniel and his son, what remained wasn't just a legal victory. It was peace. Hard-earned, quiet, and true. In a world where arrogance often wins the loudest battles, this was proof that honesty still matters. That courage doesn't need a microphone. It just needs a reason. Mr. Grayson's empire of intimidation began to crumble, one truth at a time. And Daniel? He built something better, a life grounded in love, community, and the simple belief that doing what's right is always worth it. We don't always get to see justice like this. Sometimes it's messy. Sometimes it's late. But when it comes, when the truth finally stands up, it reminds us that decency isn't weakness, it's strength. Because every act of courage, no matter how small, creates an echo that tells others, you're not alone. You can stand up. You can fight back, with truth, with grace, with heart. So if you ever find yourself standing where Daniel once stood, tired, outnumbered, but still holding on, remember this. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, and those whispers can move mountains. Sometimes the smallest voices remind the world of its conscience.